Mike, it's you.
Thanks very much, Chair. I'd just like to ask two quick questions to Sarah Vaughan. First one, you spoke of the increasing influence of the Gulf states in Ethiopia. I'd like you to describe how you see their present role in the country and what impact it's having. My second question concerns the EU. Very often when the EU is dealing with characters that are seen to have been behaving poorly, we have two different approaches. We either say, oh, it's very important to keep the channels open, or we say, oh no, he's too bad to talk to. So my question to you is, given that Abiy Ahmed has shown so little respect for human rights and has clearly been responsible for some serious atrocities, how do you think the EU should be engaging with Abiy Ahmed? Thank you very much.
Dr. Sarah Vaughan.
Thank you, Chair. I think there were 6 points addressed to me. I'll try to cover them each briefly. Firstly, the notion that Ethiopia could provide food for everyone if only things were better organized. This, in my view, is nonsense. Production has increased in certain parts of Oromia this year, wheat production, but it's clear that domestic prices remain extremely high, and it's very unclear what that total production amounts to. I very much hope that WFP is in negotiations with the government about doing as much as it can to purchase wheat locally, but I doubt that those amounts are adequate to resolve the current situation. I've spent 35 years explaining to diplomats that they should think of Ethiopia as a bit like the Netherlands. If there isn't a strong state there to pump out the water, a large proportion of the population will be underwater. And I think that's where we are now. We're in a situation where we've moved from a government that was extremely concerned under the PRDF period with making sure that the architecture for food security and protection against food insecurity was strong, to a government that has little concern for this issue and probably, in my view, little understanding of this issue. These are a government now led by people who grew up in other much more fertile, much more verdant cash crop parts of the country, and this has its own impact. Secondly, I think it's rather important to stress that all of these conflicts in Tigray, in Amhara, in Oromia, but also elsewhere, the Somali region, for instance, and the Somali-Afar conflict, are all connected, in my view, with a deeper political problem, which is stemming from this determination to centralize power in the person of the Prime Minister. And this is deeply problematic for me, and I think the European Union would be advised to take this extremely seriously. This process means that a number of the initiatives, like a national political dialogue, for instance, or a process of transitional justice, are not really worth much more than the paper they're written on. And much as one would need to continue to engage with these processes, one shouldn't hold out much hope that they will resolve the current situation. What we see is an increasing centralization of power and increasing exclusion and marginalization of those who don't cooperate. And that marginalization is increasingly resorting to violence. I think that perhaps tells its own story in terms of what sort of engagement I would like to see with the current Prime Minister. I think it should be very cautious. I think it should be rather hands-off, and I think it should be very realistic and clear-sighted about what the opportunities really are for political transformation under current circumstances. Thirdly, on Western this is indeed an extremely difficult problem, and it is a problem of the making of 2018-2019 transition, which exacerbated tensions between Amhara and Tigray politicians. Again, I think left to their own devices, they could probably find a way to negotiate their way out of this situation. But it's clear that IDPs cannot return to Western Tigray until the security situation is adequate to protect them, and that's not the case at the moment. The prospect of a referendum or of some kind of formalized legalistic process is irrelevant insofar as the security situation doesn't change. A fourth point relates to the role of the Gulf states. The Gulf states have become hugely influential in Ethiopia, and particularly one would stress the role of the United Arab Emirates. This has two significant potential risks from the point of view of European partners. One is that it undermines the leverage with which European partnerships can function. And the second is that it undermines institutionalization in the Ethiopian state's domestic processes. And this also has a knock-on effect on the kind of instruments of EU cooperation and how successful they can be. One of the very concerning factors about the support which has been given personally to the Prime Minister by the Emirates government is that it is not through institutions. It represents a huge shift of resources out of the structures of federalism and the political structures of the state into the personal purview of the Prime Minister's office. And this is deeply problematic for many reasons. Fifthly, on Somaliland, yes, it's true that many Ethiopian elites would like to have access to the sea, but it's not clear what that access to the sea really amounts to. If it means a diversification of ports, Ethiopia already had that. It was offered 19% stake in the newly developed port of Berbera in Somaliland, with the agreement of Mogadishu and with the agreement of the Somaliland government and with the facilitation of Dubai Ports World. But it failed to pay up its stake, so that seems to have lapsed. But what we now seem to be talking about is something which is much more a military interest in an exit to the sea to use for a naval port, and many experts feel that this sudden announcement of the MOU with Somaliland reflects rather the interests of the Emirates in securing a foothold on the southern littoral of the Red Sea or the Gulf of Aden. I don't expect that the formal recognition process of Somaliland will advance, but it's always invidious to make predictions. Finally, I was asked about regional players, Eritrea. In my view, Eritrea continues to be an important spoiler in the region, and the European Union should be very cautious as to how it engages with the country. It is a terrible outflow of migrants still from Eritrea. One wonders how many people can be left in the country at this stage. And there is still an important risk of, if not direct conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea, certainly of Eritrea fostering conflict around the region. I leave it at that point. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks to our guests. I will call first of all on Charles Chapuis, External Action Service, Mark Stallmans, DG INPA, and afterwards Beatrice Miege, DG ECHO for 5 minutes each. But colleagues, you have